As your journey to the React.js community continues, we're sure you're realizing why companies like Netflix and Facebook and Airbnb use React to increase their performance. It has a variety of different applications, from building beautiful user interfaces to single web page applications and complex web interfaces. But the real beauty of React is that it's fun and easy to use, as you're finding out. Welcome to the world of functions. Now, a JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. It's executed when something invokes it. That's computer speak for calls it. In this lesson, we're going to define and create functions in JavaScript, explore methods of invoking functions, explain function arguments and parameters, and finally understand function properties and methods. Defining functions. Functions are a fundamental building block for JavaScript programs and a common feature in almost all programming languages. We're going to kick the lesson off with function definitions and declarations. A function declaration tells the compiler about the function's name, return type, and parameters, while a function definition provides the actual body of the function. JavaScript functions are parameterized. This means that a function definition may include a list of identifiers, known as parameters, that work as local variables for the body of the function. The most straightforward way to define a JavaScript function is with the function keyword, which can be used as a declaration or as an expression. Now, ES6 introduced an important new way to define functions without the function keyword. Arrow functions have a particularly compact syntax and are useful when passing one function as an argument to another function. We will talk about the arrow function in detail a little bit later in this module. Function declarations consist of the function keyword followed by these components: an identifier that names the function. The name is a required part of the function declarations. It's used as the same name of a variable, and the newly defined function object is assigned to the variable. A pair of parentheses around a comma-separated list of 0 or more identifiers. Now, these identifiers are the parameter names for the function, and they behave like local variables within the body of the function. And a pair of curly brackets containing 0 or more JavaScript statements. These statements are the body of the function. They are executed whenever the function is invoked. Because functions are objects, function names are simply pointers to the function objects and are not necessarily tied to the function itself. Functions are typically defined using function declaration syntax, as in this example. In this code, a variable sum is defined and initialized to be a function. Note that there is no name included after the function keyword because it's not needed. The function can be referenced by the variable sum. Also note that there is no semicolon after the end of the function definition. Function declaration syntax is almost exactly equivalent to using a function expression, like this. Also, do note that there is a semicolon after the end of the function, just as there would be after any variable initialization. Function expressions look a lot like function declarations, but they appear within the context of a larger expression or a larger statement, and the name is optional. Here's an example of a function expression. This function expression defines a function that squares its argument. And note that we assign it to a variable called square. Functions as values. Because function names in ECMAScript are nothing more than variables, functions can be used anywhere variables can be used. This means it's possible not only to pass a function into another function as an argument, but also and to return a function as a result of another function. Take a look at this function. This function accepts two arguments. The first argument should be a function, and the second argument should be a value to pass to that function. JavaScript code that makes up the body of a function is not executed when the function is defined, but rather when it's invoked. JavaScript functions can be invoked in several ways. let's take a look at the three most common ways: as functions, as methods, and as constructors. Functions are invoked as functions or as methods within an invocation expression. An invocation expression consists of a function expression that evaluates to a function object, followed by an open parenthesis, a comma-separated list of 0 or more argument expressions, and a close parenthesis. Now here's an example of a function invocation. And another example. In a function invocation, each argument expression, the ones in between the parentheses, is evaluated, and the resulting values become the arguments to the function. These values are assigned to parameters named in the function definition. In the body of the function, a reference to a parameter evaluates to the corresponding argument value. A method is nothing more than a JavaScript function that is stored in a property of an object. If you have a function f and an object o, you can define a method named m of o, like this. Having defined the method m and the object o, invoke it like this. Or if m expects 2 arguments, you might invoke it like this. The code in this example is an invocation expression. It includes a function expression o, m, and 2 argument expressions, x and y. The function expression is itself a property access expression, and this means that the function is invoked as a method rather than a regular function. Most method invocations use the dot notation for property access, but property access expressions that use square brackets also cause method invocation. The following are both examples of the method invocation. If a function or a method invocation is preceded by the word new, then it is a constructor invocation. Constructor invocations differ from regular function and method invocations in their handling of arguments, invocation context, and return value. If a constructor invocation includes an argument list in parentheses, those argument expressions are evaluated and passed to the function in the same way that they would be for function and method invocations. Now, this isn't common practice, but you can omit a pair of empty parentheses in a constructor invocation. The following 2 lines of code, for example, are equivalent. A constructor invocation creates a new empty object that inherits from the object specified by the prototype property of the constructor. Did you know that to use a function, you must define it somewhere in the scope from which you wish to call it? In our next lesson, we're going to learn about some of the great new features of ES6. As the latest update of JavaScript, ES6 brings new syntax and some awesome features to make code more modern and readable. Basically, it allows us to write less code and do way more. It is pretty cool, so I'm sure you want to stick around for that. Function arguments in ECMAScript don't behave in the same way as function arguments in most other languages, and here's why. An ECMAScript function doesn't care how many arguments are passed in, nor does it care about the data types of those arguments. Just because you define a function to accept 2 arguments doesn't mean you can pass it in only 2 arguments. You could pass in 1 or 3 or even none, and the interpreter won't complain. This indifference happens because arguments in ECMAScripts are represented as an array internally. The array is always passed to the function, but the function doesn't care if anything is in the array. If the array arrives with 0 items, that's fine. If it arrives with more, that's okay too. In fact, when a function is defined using the keyword, meaning a non-arrow function, there actually is an arguments object that can be accessed while inside a function to retrieve the values of each argument that it was passed in. The arguments object acts like an array, though it isn't an instance of an array, in that you can access each argument using bracket notation and determine how many arguments were passed in by using the length property. In the following example, the sayHi function's first argument is named name. The same value can be accessed by referencing arguments 0. Therefore, the function can be rewritten without naming the arguments explicitly, like this. Developers have the freedom to let functions accept any number of arguments and behave appropriately. Take a look at this example. The doAdd function adds 10 to a number, only if there is one argument. If there are two arguments, they are simply added together and returned. So doAdd 10 returns 20, whereas doAdd 30 plus 20 returns 50. It's not quite as good as overloading, but it is a sufficient workaround for this ECMA script limitation. Another important thing to understand about arguments is that the argument object can be used in conjunction with the named arguments, like in this example. In this rewrite of the doAdd function, two named arguments are used in conjunction with the argument's object, and the named argument, num1, holds the same value as arguments 0, so they can be used interchangeably, and the same is true for num2 and arguments 1. Another interesting behavior of arguments is that its values always stay in sync with the values of the corresponding named parameters, like in this example. This version of the doAdd always overwrites the second argument with a value of 10, because the values in the argument's object are automatically reflected by the corresponding named arguments. The change to arguments 1 also changes the value of num2, so both have a value of 10. ES6, the new JavaScript, supports explicitly defining values for parameters if they are not provided when the function is invoked. Default parameters is done by using the equals operator directly inside the function signature, like this. Passing undefined as an argument is treated the same as not passing any argument, which allows for multiple independent default variables, like this. The length property indicates the number of named arguments that the function expects. Take a look at this example. Now, this code defines three functions, each with a different number of named arguments. The sayName function specifies one argument, and its length property is set to 1. Similarly, the sum function specifies two arguments, so its length property is 2. The sayHi has no named arguments, so its length is 0. And now we're coming up to our demo to walk you through creating functions and applying different types of function invocations. Enjoy putting the theory we've just learned into practice. Now let's see the functions in action. Quite often, we need to perform a similar action in many places for the script. For example, we need to show a nice looking message when a visitor logs in, or if a visitor logs out, or maybe somewhere in between. Functions are the main building blocks of a program. They allow the code to be called many times without repetition. We've already seen examples of built-in functions, like the alert message. But we can create functions of our own. So let's first start at function declaration. To create the function, we can use a function declaration, and it looks like this. You can write a function of your message to console "Hello everyone" to the screen. So let's start by simply typing this code. And then over here, we write our function body, which is console.log, hello everyone. The function keyword goes first, and then goes the name of the function. Then a list of parameters between the parentheses, and a comma separated between all these parameters. And finally, the code of the function, also named the function body, between curly brackets. So now we can call this function by writing show message. Then I can copy the call function and paste it again. And the call sure message now executes the code of the function 2 times. This example clearly demonstrates one of the main purposes of the function to avoid duplication. If we ever need to change the message or the way it's been shown, like that, it's enough to modify the code in one place, the function which outputs it. Now, if I save the file and see the output in the console, I will find "Hello everyone" rendered to the screen. There we go. Hello everyone. Now let's see how to add local variables to the function. A variable declared inside the function is only visible inside that function. For example, let's create a showMessage function to use the local variable. So let's just delete all of this. And instead of console.log, hello everyone, we need to declare first a message variable by using letMessage equal. Let message equal and then hello. I'm a JavaScript. And this is a local variable inside the function showMessage. So now if I console.log this message, and then call our function by using showMessage call function, and when I save this, I will find "Hello, I'm a JavaScript" rendered to the screen. Let's clear the console and save the file. We see "Hello, I'm a JavaScript." Now, what if I console.log a message outside of this function? Let's try this. Console.log message. And when I save the file, let's comment this. All right, so if I save this file, I will find message is not defined. And that's just because we used the let operator to define our message variable inside the function. And this makes the operator local to the function. But also, functions could access variables outside the function scope, and it's called outer variable. Let's see how this works. All right, let's just clear this one. And now a function can access outside variable as well. So let's define an outer variable called username and give it a value of, say, our friend John. And now let's define a function showMessage by typing function and then our function body inside that function body. I need to define a local variable message, so let message equal hello plus our username. And then console.log message. And then let's call our function showMessage. And then save this file. Now the showMessage function will declare first our message local variable. And this local variable is using hello plus outer variable username. Then when the function tries to console.log message, it should print hello John to the screen. Now, if we save this file and go to the console, we will find Hello John. There we go, Hello John rendered to the screen, and there is no space. So the way that we can resolve this is by adding a space after hello, or before the username, and then save the file, as we learned before. Also, a function has full access to the outer variable. It can modify the outer variable as well. So, for instance, suppose you want to change the John value before we print it to Bob value. So just inside the function, we can change the username to Bob. And then let's just first console.log username just before we call our function. And let's comment this one first. And save the file. And now the value of username is John. So if I go to the console, I will find John on the screen. But when we call the function and save the file, let's comment this one and save our file. The John value will be changed to Bob. So we find Bob rendered to the screen. Hello, Bob. And that's what the function does. It prints the message, which is hello, and changes the value from John to Bob. If a same-named variable is declared inside the function, then it shadows the outer one. To make the code clean and easy to understand, it's recommended to use mainly local variables and parameters within the function, not outer variables. So now let's take a look at how we can use parameter in the function. So we can pass data functions using parameters, also called function arguments. Let's have an example to show function with two parameters, from and text. So we can type function, show message, and pass two parameters, from and text. Then open our function body, and inside our function body, we console.log. So here we write the first sender of the message, from, and then plus, and then colon, and after the colon, we add the text that we want to send. Then we want to call this function. We have to pass the two parameters, like that. We type show message, and it's going to be from the first sender, let's say Anne. And the text is hello there. So when I save this, the show message will take the two parameters and hello there and pass it to the console.log to render it to the screen. So when I save this, I should get an hello there. There we go. And this is the first sender and the first text. So now we can add another sender by calling the function showMessage. And then this message from our friend John. And then the second parameter is the text. And just like this, inside quotes, because it's a string. This is John. And then when I save this file, the second message is rendered after the first one. And that's the power of writing functions, instead of repeating quotes all the time. And we just write one function and call it whenever we want. It's always easier to understand the function which gets parameters, work with them, and returns a result, rather than a function that gets no parameters but modifies outer variables as a side effect. Now let's see another function, which is called default values. So if a parameter is not provided, then its value becomes undefined. So if you want to use a default text in this case, then we can specify it after the equal sign. So in our function, showMessage for example, we can type default text. So we can just add text equals no text given. No text given. And now if the text parameter is not passed, it will get the value not given. So here, no text given is a string. But it can be a more complex expression than this, which is only evaluated and assigned if the parameter is missing. So instead of all of these, let's call the function and pass just the sender. In this case, let's use an, and forget about the text in this case. The default text, no text given, will be used. So when I save the file and check the console, it should be an and no text given rendered to the screen. There we go. And remember, functions are actions, so their name is usually a verb. And it should be as brief and as accurate as possible and describes what the function does, so that if someone reading the code gets an indication of what the function does. For example, a function that starts with show usually shows something, and a function that starts with get returns a value. Also, the function that starts with check checks something and returns a boolean, an example of which is name. Get age function, or maybe create form, and so on and so forth. Also, functions should be short and do exactly one thing. If that thing is big, maybe it's worth to split the function into a few smaller functions. Sometimes following this rule isn't easy, but it's definitely. And here's a fun little challenge for you to tackle after this lesson. Define two variables, first name and last name, and then write a function to print full name by combining the first name and the second name.